Welcome to The Bright Show. I'm your host, Capital HP. If you're just now tuning in, you're new to this channel, I just want to thank you and welcome you aboard. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can get more dope content. The Bright Show is just a diverse podcast with different people with different backgrounds. We come on here and we chop it up. If you're already familiar with the channel, then you know how we get down. Last episode was a solo episode, this is a solo episode, but this is season 2. I talked about how to let go and how to deal with breakups in the other one. So this one, we're gonna talk about the spirit versus the ego. Make sure you're tuning in. Let's get it popping. All right, so the topic is the spirit versus the ego. The reason why I thought about this is because a lot of people talk about the ego, talk about bruised egos and different things. And one of my favorite Kanye West songs is I Got a Big Ego. I really like that song. So it's all about the spirit is all about being your natural self, who you are, being humble, being more approachable, being more lax. You can be confident, but you can still be humble. That's the spirit. The ego is just like like your self-awareness, knowing your worth and knowing who you are, what you're known for. I often like to compare it to like a superhero. One of my favorite superheroes is Spider-Man, the original one from, I think it's 2002 when I was a shorty. I used to watch the original Peter Parker, where if you notice how once he realized he had his gifts and he started putting his Spider-Man suit on, he'll do all these miraculous things and then he'll just go back to being Peter Parker in regular clothes. That's the same thing when it comes to being in the spirit and then being in the ego. It's popping off, doing what you need to do, putting in your work in, and then just going back to who you are. And we're gonna talk about that, but we're also gonna talk about what happens when the ego takes over. And when the ego takes over, that's why I say when the spirit is silent, when the ego is present, because when the ego takes over, you no longer are in the spirit, you no longer are approachable, you no longer are confident, it turns into cockiness, and so on and so on. So we're gonna talk about that. So I always like to give examples when I talk about different things. So I'm gonna give examples of being in the spirit versus being in the ego. For one, I'm gonna talk about a man in a position of power, a man that has money, that has things that's of value. Oftentimes when he get in situations where if he like a woman and if she don't like him, if he's in his ego, it can be like a blow to his ego. He can feel away. He can, feel like, especially if she likes someone who's not of his same stature, that could be like a blow to his ego. Or oftentimes where like some women I date or dated, when they dialed up and feeling good, they feel good about themselves, but it's like if she not dialed up and she laid back, she's like, oh, I'm not myself today. But really that's when you are yourself. Usually that's when you get approached the most. When you just throw something on, just run to the store, that's because you're in your spirit. And when you're in the spirit, you're more approachable. So those are examples of being in the ego. The ego is also associated with being a risk taker, which is something you need to be successful. You gotta be willing to take risks and not being afraid of the outcome. But that can turn into being a daredevil. For example, if you know every story of every kingpin, they all have a similar or almost the same story, to where they start off running an operation, they get away with it for so long, and then what happens? They end up getting caught because they get flashy. And the feds know that. The feds know how the ego works, and that's why they are able to catch kingpins. Perfect example is Frank Lucas. I know that was like a movie, but it was based on a true story, The American Gangster. If you think about it, he was doing what he was doing for so long. He was laid back. Nobody knew what he was doing. But what got him caught? Some people say it was the coat, but it wasn't just the coat. He showed up to the fight. He started wanting to be seen. And that's the daredevil side. You get away with something for so long, you start feeling untouchable. And then that's usually when you get cocky. Then when you get cocky, you get sloppy. So that's what happens when the ego takes over. It makes you not hear things that the Japanese dude was trying to tell him, hey, you may want to chill out. He was like, nah, I want 500 keys. That's what happens when the ego takes over. You're not in the spirit, you're not humble, you all about yourself. And the ego, it wants constant validation when it does takes over. So those are the examples of being in the ego. But when you're in the spirit, you're more humble, you're more approachable. So now that I done gave you examples of being in the spirit, being in the ego, I also talked about what happens when the ego shows up. I'm gonna talk about how egos are sometimes created. I'm gonna use myself as an example. When I was 16 years old, my father had just got out of prison. He had this reputation or whatever. He was like a street dude. So I valued his opinion. I cared about what he said about me, what he thought about me. I cared about it. He found out that I was a virgin. I was a virgin at 16, and my plan was to wait until I was 21. I had a girlfriend. We talked about it. We're not gonna rush into that. But when my dad found out I was a virgin, he started to like crack jokes about it, and I became like the laughing stock of the family. And he was like, "Man, my own son ain't never had none," you know. And it didn't really, it bothered me a little bit, but it really didn't, because I didn't really care. I'm like, you know, I'm gonna make this happen. What happened was, either him or one of my aunties, they spread a rumor that I ain't like girls. And that's when I said, you know what, all right, I'm gonna show them. So, you know, I called my girlfriend at the time. I'm like, look, I know we said we're gonna wait, but let's get this popping. And my first time losing my virginity, what happened was all I wanted to do was smash. I didn't care nothing about a relationship and wanting to date. That's all I wanted to do, you know what I mean? And I feel like that's when that spirit was created. I even was in a serious relationship even when I was 16, but I didn't really care. I just became good at getting girls' numbers and just smashing. That's all I wanted to do. And I feel like that's how my ego was created. And that affected me later on in relationships going into my adulthood, you know, infidelity and IE and all that. So to this present day, I have my oldest son is 16. I have two sons. My oldest is 16. And my kids, unlike me, they're a lot more privileged. They're more well-off, fortunate than I was. So sometimes I struggle with trying to like insert myself in as a cool dad. Even though I know I'm raising them right, I want to be like relatable. So one day I was on the phone with my cousin, and he was like, yeah, you know, you talk about my oldest son, he's 16, like, you get him some yet? And I'm like, nah, he a virgin, he waiting. You know, he's like, nah, you need to, you know how we was when we was 16. I was like, yeah, and I got to thinking like, okay, I'm gonna get him a stripper. And that's what then one day I just was like, nah, I'm tripping. I got back in the spirit. I'm not gonna recreate that same monster, you know what I mean? And force him into losing his virginity or you know, cause just like I value my father's opinion, and my father wasn't in my life until he, you know, got out of jail when I was 16, but I've been in my kids' life since the delivery room. So I know they value my opinion. I'm not gonna use that same influence. So I just told my son, hey, look, don't be like me. Make sure you focus on your education, focus on, you know, school and everything you need to do. Get married, find a woman that's good for your heart and spirit and marry her. Don't have no children out of wedlock. Nothing cool about being a baby daddy. And I also told him, if you want to engage in other activities, make sure you protect yourself. But don't have no children out of wedlock. It's all about, you know, doing it the right way. And I feel like that's how you pass generational curses down. You keep reintroducing the same bad habits, the same mentalities. So since my ego was created, I didn't want to create that same ego or that same monster, because I didn't want it, you know, to affect him later on in his life the way it affected me. So now that I talked about how my ego was created, I'm going to talk about how the ego can affect relationships. So one of the things about the ego is you have to keep yourself occupied. You got to keep yourself busy. You know, they say an idle mind is a devil's workshop. So going into a relationship, I know I always start off doing the right thing, start off faithful, start off honest, these different things. And sometimes the ego can approach you and, oh, damn, you falling off. You used to knock down some bad ones. You know what I'm saying? Now you all in the house every day, you boring now. So then I started thinking, oh yeah, I gotta get back on something. So now next thing you know, you're on the Instagram, you're on Facebook, sliding DMs, and then you start getting responses. And then, you know, that first little daredevil show up, take something down, and then you get away with it. And that's the daredevil side of the ego. It's like you get away with something, now you want to keep getting away. You want to keep doing it. And then like the woman, she knows something is off about you. She knows something, because while you in your ego, she in her spirit, she's still in the spirit. So she knows something is off about you because you're irritable. You don't want to, you know, spend time with her, like you're not doing the things you used to do. Just want to take some things down. My last relationship is a perfect example of my ego took over, because the woman I was with, she gave me everything. She was always available for me, and that turned from being appreciated to being expected. She even allow us to open our bedroom up to another woman. Still wasn't enough. That's because the ego took over, and I started wanting to do other things, you know what I mean? And that's sometimes when people cheat, it just be an ego thing. Cause I thought about it, I'm like, I'm not really like no nympho or nothing. It's the ego. I just wanna keep taking down bad ones. But you got everything at home. You got everything you want, everything you need. But again, when you're not in the spirit and ego takes over, you want more. And that end up affecting my relationship. Now the downside to that is when your woman find out you've been cheating, right? And the thing about the ego is it's with you at your highest, but it leaves you at your lowest. So as soon as she catch you, now you back humble. You in the doghouse. Now you want to start doing all these things. You know, you don't want to lose her, you know, and if you're not careful, her ego might start talking to her. Now, not all women get back. Some, if you break their heart, you cheat on them, they'll leave you, or some they'll forgive you. But the ones who do get back, y'all know this is real. Her ego start talking to her, and it's like, hey, look, you turned down so many people. You don't respond to your inbox. You faithful to him. He made you look like a fool. Yeah, go ahead and go on a date. You know what I'm saying? I mean, and then next thing you know, you got a whole nother situation. And that's why it's a lot of problems going on in relationships. It's hurt egos, hurt people. So that's how egos can affect relationships. So I talked about how the ego was created. I also talked about how the ego affects relationships. Now I'm gonna talk about how the ego is good for competition, not confrontation. One time I wanted to buy me a new gun, and it's a gun I had that I wanted to trade in too. So I took the gun that I was gonna trade in to this gun store. I bought a gun, but I couldn't find one, you know, to match that trade in. But I bought me a Glock and got the bullets and everything, loaded it up, you know, got in the car. So I'm in the car, I stop at a store. You know how, I don't know if you own a weapon, it's when you get that first new joint, it just, it's loaded, you looking at it, you know, and I got it in the door. So I'm just, I pull up into this parking space. This dude just jumped out the truck. He jumped out the truck and I looked, he started walking towards my car. And he was like, hey bro, you ain't gonna take no parking space from me. This ain't that, and just going off. And I'm looking like, what the hell? And I looked into the truck he was in, it was a woman driving and it was filled with kids. And it's 80 degrees outside, the windows down. And I'm just looking like, oh yeah, this is perfect timing. This is with my ego. He don't even know what I got right here. You know, and I'm thinking like, you finna get into it with me over a parking space, you ain't even driving. That's crazy. But I'm like, it's perfect timing. I ain't never caught a body. Got the gun right here. I got the other one, you know what I mean, that I ain't trade in. And then I just thought about it. I guess got in the spirit. I'm like, you know what? This guy, he probably frustrated. He hot. His woman probably been yelling at him. You know, it ain't even worth it. No, I ain't trying to say I'm Rambo or something, but you can't win every battle, but I'm pretty sure I could have got that one, because if he'd have came closer, I could have got him. If he went back to his car and came back, I would have really got him. But it's not really worth it. It's just, it's really not. So that's what I'm saying about the ego is good for competition, not confrontation. You can know you can get somebody, but you know, words are just words. You know, as long as nobody's in your personal space and walking up on you, just let them talk. It's too many people in the grave or in jail, all because of hurt egos. You know what you're capable of. You know what you can do, but is it worth it? You know what I mean? It's not really worth it. So that's what I mean by the ego is good for competition, not confrontation. All right, so we talked about the ego being good for competition, not confrontation. I told you how the egos are created. I told you what happens when you are in the spirit versus when you're in the ego. Now we're gonna talk about how to control the ego. One way to control your ego is to celebrate others' accomplishments. You know, I look at everything that everybody's doing and I try to draw some inspiration from it. But every time I see somebody do something or make something happen, I celebrate it. I become like, okay, I like that, that's dope. But what this does, it keeps the ego in check and it helps you stay in the spirit, because it lets you know that you don't have a problem with other people being successful, you know, and this is the part about being humble or being in the spirit. Although when it's time for you to make a move, that competitive nature is gonna kick in, but you still celebrate others' success. Another way to control your ego is when people are praising you, and hey man, you go hard, you do this, you do that. I always do heart taps. The reason why I do this is to, hey man, I appreciate that. Hey, I appreciate that. It keeps you in the spirit, because again, when the ego takes over, it's gonna want that constant praise. It's gonna want that constant validation. So that's another way to control your ego, is to the heart tap. Appreciate all the compliments and keep it going. One final way to control your ego is celebrate your success and then just get back to what you was on. For example, one of my favorite teams, or my favorite teams in the NBA, is Golden State. When they win championships, they do this big parade, you do the celebration, take the pictures, do all that, and then they go back to the gym. It's no different from like the Spider-Man thing, having Spider-Man suit on, doing what he do, and then going back to Peter Parker. So every move you make is good. It's okay to celebrate it. It's okay to celebrate your accomplishments. Just do that, and then just start a new day. One thing Klay Thompson said, it was one game he dropped 60. He dropped 60 points, and he got all this praise, and he was like, yeah, man, I'm happy I was able to do that. 60 points in a level, only a dribble 11 times. He said, but now that I'm leaving, I'm gonna forget about this game. That was basically saying, hey, I did that, I made that happen, I'm Klay. I'm gonna forget about that game, as if I'm gonna go ahead and get back to being in the spirit. Because next game, he may only drop 11. And that's the thing about the ego. It's not good. It don't take rejection well, or it don't take failure well either. So this is why it's good to be in the spirit, because you may not always have a big moment. You know what I'm saying? So that's the difference. That's how you control your ego. All right, so I talked about how to control the ego. Now I'm gonna talk about when the ego is necessary. Sometimes you can be too humble, you know what I mean? And you can be in situations to where you're in a competitive situation and you want people to succeed, but you gotta understand everybody's not in the spirit. There are other people who are in their ego. So the ego is necessary when it's time to compete. You're like, oh man, y'all must don't know who I am. All right, I got this. That's one way the ego is necessary. Another way when the ego is necessary is sometimes you can get discouraged. Again, when you got an idle mind, you can just be thinking, and you can forget about all the things you are capable of and your accomplishments. So you can get like a vision board, and the ego is just to remind you of what you're capable of. You just tell yourself, oh man, I made that move. Oh, I remember I did that. You know what? All right, I got this. That's when the ego is necessary to uplift you when you are feeling discouraged. But again, don't let it stay though, because when it takes over, you're not gonna be in the spirit. You're gonna lose the attributes of being in the spirit. You're gonna constantly want that validation. So that's another time when the ego is necessary. All right, so this is the conclusion of this presentation about the spirit versus the ego. I hope I gave some good examples. I hope you can learn. One of the things I learned, what made me focus or come up with this whole project, is something in a religious text. So according to religious text, God, created other angels. He created all these other angels, but he created Satan, or Lucifer. And from what they're saying is he made him perfect next to himself. So Lucifer had power over like music. They said one of his wings covered the throne of heaven. You know what I mean? He had all these abilities. They said God made him perfect next to himself. And then what happened? He tried to take over heaven. He wanted to be the one. And God had to cast him out. And that's exactly what happens with us. It's like the ego, it wants to take over. So he had to cast him out, and God saw a part of himself that he created that tried to take over. So since we're made in the image of God and the likeness of God, we have to make sure we control our ego and not allow it to take over. And the other different alternatives or different alter egos we create is like, if you're a parent, right? You are mom or dad to your child. Being a parent, that requires a certain personality. Then you go to your workforce or your place of business. You that person at work. You are the person you in a relationship. You that person in a relationship. You are the person wherever you go, like in the community. Each personality you have, or each relationship you have, requires a different personality. These are alter egos. But the main thing is staying in the spirit. So I hope I gave you a good example or great examples, and you can take it with you. It's okay to pop off, it's okay to turn up, but make sure you stay in the spirit, make sure you stay humble. If you enjoy that, just make sure you tune in, make sure you subscribe and hit the like button so you can get more of this dope content. Again, it's the spirit versus the ego, the capital HP, the Bryce Show.